Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Rational Theology podcast. I'm your host, LJ Sarman, and I'm currently a freshman at BYU. I'm studying philosophy. This is my podcast. And in this first episode here, I pretty much just wanted to kind of give an intro to what the podcast will be like, what the point of it is, who I am, obviously. I kind of want also this to serve as kind of in the future, if people are watching my later episodes and want to understand who I am better or my conversion story, things like this, they can refer to this episode to kind of get some context for who I am or what the purpose of the channel is. I guess first of all, just the channel, I hope to kind of use this channel, this podcast, as a platform to talk about kind of the more theological, philosophical side of faith, but also the practical side of faith, and kind of get into I'll be talking mainly about Christians and Christianity on this podcast. And so I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, colloquially known as the Mormon Church. And so I'll be talking a lot about Mormonism. I'll be talking a lot about hopefully Catholicism, Protestantism, how they intersect, how they compare and contrasting, and talking about the history of all of them respectively. Hopefully I can get some interesting conversations going. I've got already a few guests lined up who I'm pretty excited for. So hopefully it can just be kind of engaging forum of discussion for some of these, more historical, philosophical, theological ideas in terms of Christianity. So, it's essentially what I'm here for. Also here to help introduce a lot of LDS people into what other Christians think and believe, and vice versa. Kind of just introduce people to new ideas. So essentially, very briefly, that's the point of the podcast. And also I think it's important to point out I'm not an expert in anything. I feel fairly confident in my knowledge base in a few specific areas, but I'm not trying to purport as if I'm some sort of expert in Christianity or history or anything like this. I'm only 20 years old. I've only really been into this stuff, passionate about this stuff for a little over a year and a half. So I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. I'm not trying to act as if I'm an expert or something. And so that's why I'll be trying to bring on people who actually are experts in some of these areas and interview them, have good discussions with them. But that's not to say, my ideas aren't worth anything. I like to respect people's ideas and opinions based on the merit of the actual opinion itself. I think I'll hopefully have some interesting, valuable insights, things to say. Essentially that's the podcast. So I guess about me, I'm LJ Sarman. I am 20 years old. I'm at BYU, like I said, freshman philosophy major. I was born into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Both my parents are members. 3 of my 4 grandparents are converts to the church. So I definitely kind of feel the influence, that convert influence in my life. So although I was born into the church, like many people, I didn't always necessarily believe. So I was baptized as an 8-year-old, as is kind of the tradition in the LDS church. We grew up active. I would go to church. I go to church activities and things. I certainly as a child, I would have claimed to, have a testimony, have belief in God and things like this. But I would say kind of my first conversion experience, came when I was around 14 years old. And so, my freshman year in high school was a particularly difficult year of my life. I wasn't diagnosed with any sort of mental health problems. I mean, I never went to the doctor for anything or saw anybody for anything, but I certainly had some symptoms of depression, and so it was a very, very difficult year for me. Every day I felt for some reason I felt very alone. I felt very, very burdened just by existing. I'd kind of wake up, and I just felt like most of the time I had kind of this darkness, just kind of that I had to carry around everywhere, and it just kind of hurt. It hurt to kind of be alive sometimes, and so yeah, that was quite a difficult year, and I guess also important to my life growing up was we moved around a lot, and so going into this freshman year, I was coming from Alabama, and we moved to Canada. And in Alabama, my last year there, I did eighth grade, and kind of the end of the eighth grade year was a little tough. And I was kind of just like, oh man, it would be nice. It would be a nice year to move. Essentially, is what I was thinking. I was thinking it would be nice to go somewhere else, just turn a new leaf, or whatever that saying is. And so my dad actually got a job opportunity in Ottawa, Canada, and my dad works in the government, and so that's why we would always move around and things. But I jumped at that opportunity, and I was like, yes, let's go there. And so the school had been pretty hyped up to me. They said it was super good academically and athletically, and so I was just super excited to kind of just be involved in this new community, in this new area, in this new school. But as I've already explained, things did not turn out at all how I had kind of expected, and so I had kind of this hyped up, fantastical idea of what that year would be like, what my high school experience would be like, and getting to the school actually was kind of the exact opposite. Just the academics of the school were not as good as I had hoped, and the athletics. Just the sports culture in Canada was so different, and it was just a big culture shock going from the South, where sports is like a religion, up to the Canada, where sports aren't taken all that seriously compared to especially the Southern USA. But that year sucked. And I think another thing that played into it was, like I said, I grew up kind of being active in the church, but that year I kind of had said to myself, okay, I'll set aside certain standards, or set aside certain, teachings of the church or whatever, in an effort to kind of, I don't know, just, I was definitely focused more on popularity and fitting in, rather than religion, if that makes sense. And so I was certainly kind of setting my religion aside that year, and so that definitely played into kind of that darkness that I always felt. And so I don't know how else to explain it. I was really sad all the time, really lonely all the time. I found it very difficult to make friends. I kind of had my church friends, but at school it was like I was just alone all the time. And so I eventually decided to just go to the library during lunch, and so I didn't have to try to fit in and sit anywhere or things like that. And so I would just go to the library at lunch and sit alone and read. Or that's actually when I started making music. And so kind of all that happened, and it was interesting because that summer my parents had signed me up to go to a church campus called EFY, and so it's pretty cliche, but that was actually a very important experience in my kind of coming to understand what Christianity is and its importance. And so I kind of went there and was kind of forced to interact with Scripture for the first time, forced to interact with kind of some of these ideas of Christianity for the first time. And of course, I'd grown up going to church and things, so there was Sunday school, but I was never really actively involved in it. And so it was the first time, rather than having things read to me or told to me, it was the first time I was really reading things for myself or getting into things for myself. And so that ended up being extremely, hugely important. And that week, obviously when I got there, I started just aggressively kind of searching about loneliness. What do the scriptures have to say about loneliness? What do modern church leaders have to say about loneliness? And so I found out essentially the story of Jesus for the first time and really internalized it for the first time. And I had some very, very, very powerful spiritual experiences where I can't quite describe what happened, but essentially I felt some sort of some sort of spiritual presence, some again, I don't know how to word it, but kind of, there was a few times where I felt this just incredible feeling of love and euphoria that somewhere in my mind was connected with the love of God. And so reading this Jesus narrative for the first time and understanding how lonely he had been during his last few hours of existence really, I don't know, I just became converted to this idea that Jesus Christ came, was God incarnate, and laid his life down for my sins, and also because of his love for me. And so I just felt this infinite love, and it's not a feeling I felt often since, but that was definitely the first point in my conversion where I was like, okay, I know there's a God, and I know that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that he was not just a moral teacher, not just a historical figure, but he was the Son of God in the flesh, because of those things I had felt, and also because intellectually, for the first time, kind of the message of Christianity clicked for me, the gospel clicked for me. So that was huge. And then there weren't many other super important points in my conversion throughout the rest of high school. And my mental health did gradually, get better. And it's doing great now. But yeah, I guess the next important part of my conversion story came during my mission. And so I served a mission right out of high school. And the main reason kind of I wanted to serve a mission was to help people come out of those dark places that I had been in. Kind of give people this solution. Kind of an analogy I thought of back in that time was, I had been in some deep dark hole, and then a way out was extended to me, which was understanding Jesus Christ, who he was and who he is, and why he was and why he is. And so that's kind of why I wanted to go on a mission, was to kind of extend this ladder to other people in dark places. And for those who don't know, an LDS mission involves, for males, serving for 2 years, and you don't get to choose where you serve, and you don't get to choose who you serve with. So you're with a companion 24/7. It's pretty serious stuff. And so the way you go, you like get a call, is you submit some papers, and then the living 12 apostles look over your papers, and by revelation assign you an area to serve your mission. So I submitted my papers, and I got called to Hungary, which is in Eastern Europe. And so I was pretty excited. I really wanted to learn a language. That's another thing on the mission. You become fluent in the language of wherever you go, and you teach in that language. So I was super excited. I love learning languages, and so I was excited to learn one of the hardest languages, Hungarian. And so I went and was working really hard, and it was in my second area that kind of the next important point of my conversion story comes along. And I was with one of my favorite companions. We were working hard. We were being obedient, doing all the things, checking all the things on the checklist that you're supposed to do as a good missionary. But we weren't having too much success. But one week I still remember the number, we had 9 lessons in that week, and that's the most amount of lessons I ever taught in a week. But something weird about those lessons, about that week, was that every person in those lessons essentially told me that I was being deceived, and that I was following a false religion. And there were even a couple of them who prayed for me by name at the end of the lesson, that I would find the real truth, that I'd find the real God or whatever. And so that was pretty interesting, and it really got under my skin. It got into my head. And something that kind of laid the groundwork for this leading to kind of a faith crisis was the fact that while I was in Hungary, a pet peeve that I acquired was closed-mindedness. So, for example, something that would happen to me very often was I would contact somebody, whether in the street or knocking on their door or whatever it is, or online, and I would talk to them. I would introduce the idea of the Book of Mormon, the idea of the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I would invite people to learn more, read the Book of Mormon, or just try out this new message I was giving them. But something that people would often do is they'd say, "Oh, I'm a Catholic," or "Oh, I'm a Baptist," or whatever. "I don't need to read your book because I already know it's false, because we only need the Bible," or things like that. And so it became very annoying to me that people, without having any sort of idea of the thing I was offering them, would reject it, regardless of what premises they're rejecting it on, without actually knowing the contents of the thing that I was offering them, if that makes any sense. And so a pet peeve of mine had become closed-mindedness. And so after these lessons where these people were telling me I was deceived, I kind of said to myself, well, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't know what Catholicism teaches. I don't know what Protestantism teaches. I don't know what Orthodoxy teaches. And so I kind of, after that point, got kind of, like I said, it kind of kicked off a faith crisis. And it wasn't a faith crisis in the fullest sense of the word. I never at any point questioned the existence of God or questioned the role of Jesus Christ as Savior of the world. But I certainly did begin to question whether or not I was being deceived in the teachings of prophets of the church throughout history, or just essentially that was kind of the first time that I ever considered the fact that maybe I'm in the wrong denomination. Maybe the form of Christianity that I'm in is not the correct form. And so after that point, like I said, it really got in my head. It kind of scared me, if that makes any sense. And so I really started to delve deeper into the Bible. I finished reading the Bible all the way through, and I reread the Book of Mormon. I reread the Doctrine and Covenants, and I really just kind of sat down and looked at the history of my church, and looked into what other faiths teach and kind of the doctrinal differences and things like that. And so, and there are even a few times where I prayed, and in my prayer, I use phraseology like, I'm not praying to the Mormon God right now, I'm praying to whoever the one true and living God is, or things like that. And so I honestly, if I had felt that the scriptures, or felt spiritually kind of led towards the direction of leaving the church, I was ready to do so. And so I guess long story short, I don't want to drag this out too much, because kind of the details aren't the most interesting. Like this isn't some crazy conversion story. But long story short, for the next 3 to 6 months, I really, really delved into, like I said, church history. I read, the first volume of Saints. I read a lot of things. I listened to what certain people of other faiths had to say, looked into what Catholicism offered, what Calvinism offered, what other Protestant sects offered. And so I really got invested into seeking those things out, as well as becoming extremely well versed in the scriptures. And so I started memorizing scripture references like crazy. I started kind of really examining my own beliefs. And I'd say definitely at that time, I broke down all my beliefs to nothing. I kind of said, I'm going to start with, I believe in God, and I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. And so I kind of started with those things and built up all my other beliefs from the ground up. And so I'm definitely not kind of like I'm not necessarily like a stereotypical Mormon in a lot of the things I believe, or in the way I think. But long story short, I came out of that kind of few month long period after reading a lot of things, understanding my church's history more. And I came out of that deeply converted, more converted to Christ, and more converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and more converted to the fact that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God and responsible for restoring Christ's New Testament church. And so, I don't know, a couple very important things in that were, one thing was I read Richard Bushman's Rough Stone Rolling, which is probably the best biography of Joseph Smith. And it does a very good job of just laying out the facts of his life in a fairly unbiased manner. It doesn't leave out the bad things, doesn't leave out the good things. And so that was huge in my conversion. But another very important thing in my conversion was getting into theology, getting into philosophy, and like I said, building up my beliefs in a systematic manner so that there weren't contradictions. Because something I felt like is a lot of people in my church and other churches have a lot of contradictions in the things that they believe. And I didn't like that. I'm a pretty rationally minded guy, so I like to just have systems in place for understanding what I believe and why. And so I did that. And the big thing in that was, one day I was really puzzled, really troubled about kind of some of the, what was it? Kind of, how should I put this? One kind of traditional belief in the LDS church, which isn't doctrine per se, but is, I would say, a widely held belief among most of the members of the church, which is that the doctrine of God having a God, or kind of the doctrine of infinite regression, the infinite regression of gods, which I felt was deeply unscriptural and made me feel very uncomfortable. So that was one thing. This was kind of probably the last point in my conversion process to the church that I got figured out before I was fully back in and fully committed. And so I was very concerned about this. And one day I was talking to my friend and he said, "Oh, well, you don't have to," and this kind of doctrine of God having a God is derived from Joseph Smith's King Follett discourse, which was one of the last sermons he gave before he was martyred in 1844. But in that sermon, he makes certain statements which on their face can seem like it suggests that God has a God, or that God himself kind of progressed from being a man to being a God. And so these things just deeply troubled me. I really did not like that idea. But kind of my friend said, "Well, you don't have to have that interpretation of the King Follett discourse." And he sent me a really good resource, which was one of Robert Boylan's podcast episodes he did with Blake Ostler, his Scriptural Mormonism podcast, in which he discusses with Blake Ostler a different reading of the King Follett discourse, in which he says that Joseph Smith in that discourse isn't talking about how God has a God or anything like that. It's just he's essentially talking about how God gained his physical body, because that's one doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is that God is a corporeal God. He has a physical body. So yeah, because we're not Trinitarians, and so that's one doctrine that we have. But essentially, his reading of the King Follett sermon is that in the discourse, Joseph Smith is just explaining how God got his body. And so when he makes statements like he lived on an earth like us, he's not saying that God had some sort of mortal probation in which he was tested and eventually rose to the status of God. He's just explaining how he gained his physical body, in that he lived on an earth like Jesus did, and through resurrection was able to gain a physical body like Jesus did. Because right in Mormonism, Jesus Christ was God before he came to the earth, and he was God afterwards. He just happened to be embodied afterwards. Right, and so essentially that was Blake Ostler and Robert Boylan's reading of the King Follett discourse, and that was very, very freeing for me, that I did not have to be committed to the idea that God was not God at some point, and that he became God through having a God of his own. And so, yeah, essentially, I'm sure I'll do future podcast episodes on that specific issue, kind of delving into it further. And it may not make a lot of sense if you don't have a lot of context for it immediately. But suffice it to say, I was converted to Christ at the age of around 14, and then converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at about the age of 19 or 20. And so that's why, though, I'm creating this podcast, is to kind of just put another intellectual LDS voice out there to discuss philosophy, theology, and some of these other things, which have greatly blessed me and my ability to remain in the church, remain a believer, not only in God, but in the church that I'm in. And so, yeah, the point of this podcast, I'm not trying to like convert everybody to Mormonism. I'm essentially trying to provide people with tools with which they can remain in faith, remain believing in God, believing in Christ. And because I don't know, it's definitely not always easy to believe in God and believe in Christianity, especially I don't know, just when you have certain life experiences or you hear certain arguments levied against theism or your specific denomination. But yeah, essentially that is my point of this podcast, is to, like Jesus told Peter, I think in the New Testament, he says, "When thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." And so that is essentially what I'm going to try to do here with these tools that have allowed me to become so converted. And so, yeah, hopefully that was listenable enough. I know I kind of ranted a little bit. I didn't script this at all. I kind of just stream of consciousness discuss these things. But yeah, in the future, I won't do probably very many solo podcasts, if any. So if you didn't really like the way this was formatted or things, don't worry. It won't be like this in the future. I'll have actual guests, and there will be more of a discourse, a discussion going on. So yeah, hopefully though this made sense. Hopefully this was edifying in some capacity, and I hope that you return in the future to listen to the more interesting sort of conversations I'll be having in the future. But yeah, if you have any recommendations of topics or people you want on the podcast, please comment or message me directly. If you're in faith crisis or struggling to maintain a belief in God or in the church or whatever church you're in, please reach out to me. I love helping people in faith crisis and things like that, and I feel like having been there in some way myself, am able to help people. So yeah, just give me recommendations, people you want to see in the podcast, things you want to hear talked about, any sort of critiques, anything, just comment it, let me know. But yeah, thank you guys for listening this far if you made it. And yeah, this was the first episode of the Rational Theology podcast. I'll see you next time.